taking us, I think, from song to prose.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I didn't get a chance to print this. My printer died on me, so I'll have to give you the laptop version. This is Happy Halloween. This is actually a timely story. This just happened to my friends just a couple of days ago up in Chicago. They're a couple of Cubs fans. And they called me and they told me such a good version of the story, I was able to write it down into an actual story. I call it The Shadows of Yesterday. Here we go. It was a particularly scary looking fog that had settled over the city of Chicago, Illinois. Adam even called it an appropriate fog for a Halloween weekend. His cousin Larry agreed in every regard, except the part about the fog settling in. This isn't a thick fog that settled in, Larry insisted. It came in too fast. It did not roll in, it blew in. He turned and looked at Adam through the fog. He wasn't that far away, and already the fog had partially obscured him. And it wasn't thick, he noticed. It still isn't thick. Larry waved his hand through the air and watched as the fog parted around it. Adam had noticed the same thing. The fog seemed to be too thin to be this effective at blocking their visions. And the moon. Larry was looking at a bright full moon as he spoke. Adam looked up now also. It was bright, much too bright for these conditions. Larry continued, "How can we see the moon through this fog when I can barely see you 10 feet away from me? And how can the moon be so bright? Look behind you. It casts a small shadow on the very fog that fills in behind us." Adam looked behind them, and sure enough, though he could barely see it, there was a slight shadow on the fog that seemed to mimic each motion they made. Adam tried to respond. "It's just..." "No, Adam," Larry interrupted. "This fog is not settling. It's invaded." The two walked on in silence for a while, occasionally glancing back at the shadows following them. They walked past the closed-up shops and noticed some of the merchandise behind the glass windows, which were themselves behind a crisscross mesh of steel curtain. Then they walked into the subdivisions that led out toward Wrigley Field, the famous baseball park where the Chicago Cubs play. It was a week after the Cubs had been knocked out of the playoffs, and as Adam stated, it was the weekend of Halloween. Just then, Larry pointed to the foggy area ahead of him and said, "What's that?" Adam squinted. "What's what?" Well, his voice trailed off in mid-word because he noticed what it was Larry saw. It was the same sort of shadows that the two cousins were casting on the fog behind them. As they watched the shadows, they saw them double in size. What had originally looked like a couple of yard ornaments about 2 feet tall sitting in the middle of the sidewalk all of a sudden looked like a small boy and a dog. Larry and Adam took another step and suddenly stopped. In the span of that one step, the shadows had grown again, and one of them was now about 6 feet tall and had the appearance of an old man. The shadow next to him had grown too. It was now bigger than most dogs, more like the size of a sheep or a goat. "A goat," Adam exclaimed, and excited Larry responded, "Well, it's the size of a goat and it's got horns on its head." Adam asked, "Is that even real? Or are they just shadows in the fog?" I don't know, was the labored response from Larry. "Let's get out of here." The two turned around and started walking back in the direction they had just come from. Unconsciously, they had picked up the pace of their late night walk, and were back to the closed-up shops in a hurry. But they both stopped short. The two shadows were now ahead of them, blocking up the faint burgundy glow of a neon light blinking in the background. The light was in the shape of a large arrow which pointed to the entrance of a store. On a clear night, it blinked red. Adam asked Larry, "Are those the same shadows, and are they even bigger again?" "Quick, let's go down Waveland Avenue," Larry eagerly suggested. "I know someone that lives there." The two crossed the street and disappeared into the fog. It didn't take many of their very quick steps until they were at a full-fledged run. As they watched behind them and all around for shadows that weren't their own. They had run several blocks and were now approaching an intersection that is famous to all baseball fans, Waveland and Sheffield Avenues. Larry and Adam had both grown up on these very streets and chased after home runs that were hit by their favorite ball players, but tonight they may be running down these streets for their life. Suddenly, Adam felt a rush of wind move past him. It pushed him into Larry as the two ran. "I don't like this," Adam shouted. "I'm calling the police just in case they can help." "But," Larry interrupted, "what are we talking we saw?" Adam didn't answer. Instead, he raised his eyes upward and gazed at the giant shadow standing behind Larry. Grabbing Larry by the arm, Adam pulled him down the avenue toward the entrance to Wrigley Field. "We have to get away from here. He's right behind us," was the only warning he gave to Larry before they ran. But when they ran around the corner of the stadium, they were stopped by the sight of an animal the size of a rhinoceros. It displayed a bright light from the two goat-like horns on its head. The glow of the horns lit up the entire area, which had grown dark with the disappearance of the moon. It was as if the moonlight had moved into the shadow creature and transformed it. "That's not the goat, is it?" They both froze. For that moment, they could sense the presence of the giant shadow man behind them. "Behold and beheld," the sentence boomed and echoed through the neighborhood. Larry and Adam stood still. They weren't sure if they were paralyzed by some sort of magic or if they were just frozen in fear. "Face me," the voice commanded. Again, they were not sure if it was magic or sheer willpower, but they turned to face the giant shadow. They could see the entire form of the old man now, but they could not see him well. His image faded in and out of being. While one part would seem to disappear, another would be visible, yet covered by fog. Then, like the beating of a heart, faint parts would again be visible, like a shadow. Once they were facing the shadow man, he spoke again. "By the power of will and by my command, all curses and spells on these two are to be ceased immediately." Larry and Adam exchanged quizzical and frightened looks. They could feel the power emanating from the aberration and were too afraid to do anything more. Thusly distracted, Murphy, which is the name of the large goat with the glowing horns, walked up behind the two Cubs fans. "Commence," ordered the old man. With that, the 8-foot-tall goat plunged both of its horns into Larry and Adam. They had turned quickly when the old man yelled, and just in time to see the horns coming at them, so they were already screaming in anticipation of the pain. But the pain never came. Instead, Larry and Adam opened their eyes to discover they were no longer in their bodies. They were mere spirits being held aloft of their bodies, having been skewered by Murphy the killer goat. And they were no longer young men. And even worse, they were no longer young men. They themselves were now both old men. And even worse, they were only the spirits of old men. Adam didn't mean to speak, but he did anyway. "I figured you were behind this, Howard." Those were not the words that Adam wanted to speak. In fact, Adam did not want to speak at all. Larry, too, did not mean to speak, but he responded to Adam's comment. "So what if I was?" were the words that came out of Larry's spirit mouth. "What if I did do something to the high and mighty Pinkerton family and all their heirs? You were so proud of that name." "What did you do to my family?" asked Pinkerton's spirit. "I cursed them," Howard said eagerly. "I cursed all of your kin for the rest of time." "Hold!" the loud command boomed out all around them. The giant shadow man would not let Howard lie. "Okay, okay," Howard shouted. "Not forever. I didn't curse them forever." The pain started to subside. "Not forever." Howard looked at the giant shadow man and continued, "I cursed them until the series." "What?" responded the spirit of Elmer Pinkerton. The series," repeated Howard. "I cursed your family until the Chicago Cubs win the World Series." With that confession came a loud clap of thunder, and the Howard spirit stopped writhing. "The curse is ended," said the shadow man. "But he stole the deed to my coal mine," Howard yelled at the shadow man. "Enough, and be gone," the shadow commanded. And as the spirit of Murphy the goat ran off down the street with the yet impaled Howard upon Murphy's horn, he yelled his last words, yet broken with emotion. Elmer stole the only girl I ever loved. Then Murphy the goat turned the corner and was gone, taking with him the old soul of Howard Connor, gold miner and unrequited lover of Mrs. June Pinkerton. Then all eyes turned back to the old spirit still hovering over Adam. Elmer's spirit stated the following to be true. I did not steal the deed to his gold mine. Howard gambled it away, and I simply bought the deed off the new owner in an effort to keep it in the family. You see, Howard and I are cousins. The spirit looked at the two modern-day cousins and noticed the shocked look on their faces. I must now be off to cancel 10,000 other curses that ended on that day, the Shadow Man informed them. That fateful day last year when the Chicago Cubs beat the Cleveland Indians to become World Series champions, and put an end to the 70-year curse placed on them by me, William Cianis, and my goat Murphy. But the curse had nothing to do with the Cubs, remarked the spirit of Elmer. No, said the Shadow Man, they seldom do. It's just the unavoidable result of that famous saying, till the Cubs win the World Series. I love my wife, June, Elmer's spirit said to the open eyes and mouths before him. Then Adam looked at Elmer as he floated off towards the not so much a giant anymore Shadow Man and said, Howard said that you stole June from him. For the first time since the curse was cast upon his family in 1949, Elmer smiled, and then he responded, she was worth the curse. The spirit of Elmer and the Shadow Man then began to shrink as they seemed to move off into the distance of the fog. A piece of paper floated down from the sky and landed at their feet as they disappeared, and one last sentence was heard from the thin, misty substance. I have had only two treasures in my life. My wife June made me rich in spirit, and here is a map to help you find the second treasure. And then the story could just have ended there. It just so happens, though, that on the treasure there was a city, and the city was Austin, Texas. So my friends, being excited that I live so close to Austin, Texas, they called me up and they said, there's a clue on here. It's something to do about George Washington and cutting down the cherry tree in Austin. And so I did some research and I found out that there is a Washington Square in Austin. I went down there late last night and found a cherry tree. So I looked by the cherry tree and I moved this big rock and I found this box underneath that rock in the cherry tree. I thought we would come here today to find out what was buried all those years ago. Well, who knows what this is, but it does say my treasure on the back of it. It's kind of gold. Ah, my treasure indeed. Maybe this could be the deed to the gold mine. Now it all makes sense. The greatest treasure next to my wife is every story that I've ever read in my entire life. Happy Halloween, everybody. Also all kinds of candy in here. I don't know how we knew it was going to be Halloween when I took this box up. But I'm going to leave this back here for anybody that wants to.